Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project, where we're creating the blueprint to help you become the best human you can be. I'm your guide and fellow optimizer, Christopher Camp. I'm sure many of you have heard the term emotional intelligence before. It's an incredibly common buzzword. It's used a lot in society and our lives today. But if you're like most people, you've probably heard the term. You maybe have a little bit of an idea of what it means, but you probably don't know how to define it precisely. And you probably have less of an idea of how you can actually improve it. Today, we want to help you with that. So, the title for our session today is Emotional Intelligence Explained: How to Recognize, Understand, and Use Your Emotions to be a More Effective Human. The three big questions that we're going to try to tackle around this are: number one, what exactly is emotional intelligence? Our second question: what are the benefits and why should I make it a priority to improve my own emotional intelligence? And lastly, what are the steps I can take to maximize my own emotional intelligence? To help us work through these questions today, we have Marianne Jenny with us. Marianne, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
It's an honor to have you. Marianne is an executive coach at Mayo Clinic. She has a master's in adult education and is also a professionally certified coach with a credential from the International Coaching Federation. She's a senior advisor in workforce learning at Mayo Clinic and assistant professor in medical education. She's been teaching on emotional intelligence and other leadership topics for over 20 years. She's conducted hundreds of workshops and lectures, most of which centered around teaching leaders and other employees topics such as emotional intelligence. I've had the benefit of attending a few of those myself, and I can vouch for. I think we're in for a very good discussion today. So, Marianne, obviously, this is a really big topic. I know you've got a lot of experience. This is a topic that's very near and dear to your heart. So, we thank you for taking the time to help us sort of sort through this, understand it, and work through it today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Great. So, let's get started with some definitions. What exactly is emotional intelligence and how do you define it?
Yeah, and that's such a big question because there is not a universally accepted definition of what emotional intelligence is. I think of it as an umbrella term for multiple skills, behaviors, traits that fall underneath it. The most simple definition that I like to use is that it is about your personal and social competence, the ability to know and understand yourself, your emotions, and the ability to understand other people's emotions and use that emotional information to navigate situations.
I like that. That's a great definition, and you've got several sort of key components in there that I want to pull out. So you talked a little bit about knowing and understanding, using, managing. Those are all keywords that I think are important. And you also referenced yourself and others too. So I think that is a definition that's packed full of valuable information. Can you tell me a little bit about to help us organize that? What are the key components that you see that constitute emotional intelligence?
Yeah. Daniel Goleman is well known for his work in emotional intelligence, and he is the individual who actually brought EI to the mainstream back in 1995. There are multiple models of emotional intelligence out there. He has a very what I would described as a very simple model that I like to follow. And it's comprised of four components: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and social management. So to think of it as those four quadrants is a way that I think is easier for people to get their arms around what it means when I use the term personal competence and the term social competence.
That's great. I love that, and I like organizing into those 4 parts. So, I'm taking notes here. I have them written down, and I wanna come back to each of those specifically and go through them, kinda one by one.
Mhm.
Before we do that, though, I wanna talk a little bit more about the broader term of emotional intelligence, and can you tell me What is the difference, or maybe the similarities between emotional intelligence and cognitive intelligence?
Yeah, great question. Cognitive intelligence is our ability to learn, our ability to reason, our ability to solve complex problems, and so forth. Emotional intelligence is the ability to manage our emotions in a way that helps us do those cognitive things even more effectively. We need both. One is not better than the other. We need both of them, but they are related, but yet very distinct.
Got it. Different but related.
Right.
Well, what about the term social intelligence? Because that's a term that I often hear used separate from emotional intelligence, but also I hear it kind of overlapping with emotional intelligence, like it's the same thing. How would you differentiate emotional intelligence and social intelligence?
Yeah, this is something that I think has evolved as researchers have continued to study emotional intelligence, and they are very much related, yet they do have some distinct components. So you will hear the terms emotional and social intelligence, used in combination. Primarily, the difference with social intelligence is about navigating social situations. So in the earlier description I gave of the four quadrants of self-awareness, self-management, and the other two, social awareness and social management, that's getting more into it's building upon emotional intelligence, but now it's drawing in those components that deal with managing social relationships and situations.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, emotional intelligence obviously is not just about the self, it is about others. So social intelligence really refers to that half of emotional intelligence that deals with others and relating to other people. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. Whereas the personal, knowing yourself and your emotions and what you're feeling, the social piece of it is also being able to pick up on emotional cues from other people, and using that information, again, to navigate the situation, whatever it may be.
Okay, great. So while we're clarifying terms, another term that we hear a lot is EQ.
Mhm.
We hear people talk about individuals, oh, they have a high EQ or a low EQ. I've had the fortune and misfortune of hearing both of those in my lifetime. So, what exactly is EQ? What does that mean, and how does that relate?
EQ refers to, a measurement of emotional intelligence. So when you think about cognitive intelligence, what's the measure? IQ, right? Intelligence quotient. With EQ, emotional quotient, relates to we can measure emotional intelligence and put a number to it, and we can get into that more if you'd like to. That's to me the biggest distinction. I don't think it's, super important that we make that distinction in our everyday vernacular. I think the terms can be used interchangeably, but technically, in my mind, that's the difference between them.
Okay, and how do those two? So, IQ
Mhm.
versus EQ.
Yep.
How do those relate to each other? Meaning, does having an high IQ, necessarily correlate with a high EQ or maybe a low EQ? So, is there a relationship between the two? Can one, if you're deficient in one, can you make up for it with the other? What are your thoughts on that relationship?
Yeah, yes and no. This is such a great question. We need both, as I said. Many people refer to our IQ as our threshold competence, if you will. You need a certain amount of intellectual capacity to do a job, whatever that job may be. That gets you in the door. What will help you excel is your EQ, your ability to work with other people, to manage yourself, to present yourself well, etc. There are, we know many people in healthcare who have very high IQ. They may or may not have high EQ. It's not a given that just because you have a high IQ, you'll have a high EQ. And where people get into trouble are folks who have high IQ but low EQ. They can be the most technically proficient, brilliant person on the planet. If they are unable to manage relationships, work through conflict, collaborate with other people, they're not going to be successful in their organization. Now, conversely, I know of a young woman who has an intellectual disability. Her IQ is borderline. She is employed at an entry level position. She has enough IQ to do the job that she is required to do, the technical aspects of it, if you will. What helps her to succeed is her EQ and her ability to connect with customers, to be friendly, engaging, um, and is very successful. So part of it is how do you define success?
Mhm. And I think too, in that sense, EQ to me is almost a force multiplier. And I like the way you describe that, and that IQ is sort of the baseline and gets you in the door, and it sort of sets the threshold. But what you do with that
Right.
is largely going to be dependent upon your EQ. And you may have an insanely high IQ and be incredibly talented and have some really unique and special gifts. But I think your ability to make use of those gifts and give those gifts back to the world are
Yeah.
going to be largely dependent upon your EQ. Is that fair?
Well said. Yep.
All right.
Perfect. Yeah.
What are some? So I've tried to understand emotional intelligence and EQ a little bit better. What are some other misconceptions that people will commonly have about emotional intelligence that I haven't brought up yet?
I think by far and wide, one misconception of EQ is that it means that you should always be nice and friendly. That is not what EQ is about. It's you can be stern, you can hold people accountable, you can have tough conversations. It's all in the delivery of how you do that. I think that is probably the biggest misconception. Another one would be that emotions make you weak, that emotions don't have a place in the workplace, which is completely false. We're human beings. We emote every minute of every day. And our emotions, as we've been talking about, can actually enhance our effectiveness. And then the third one, common misconception, is that either you have it or you don't. And that is also a misconception. Some people, and this gets into a little bit about the different theories of emotional intelligence. Some researchers believe that it's a set of traits. Others believe it's a set of abilities. Others believe it's a combination of the two or a mixed model. What we've learned is that you can grow your emotional intelligence. Some people are gifted and come by it much more naturally for various reasons, upbringing, influences in the environment, etc., culture, all of that kind of thing. Other people have to work at it a little bit harder, but you can change your behavior. So that would be the third misconception.
Good. Well, you're setting us up nicely because at the end of this thing, I'm going to ask you how we do that, which I think is challenging.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about that. One of the misconceptions I think of is that oftentimes people think of emotional intelligence as being something that only applies to leaders or is only important for the CEO or the boss or whoever's in charge.
Mhm.
But in reality, I think that it's sort of a universal concept that applies to everybody's life, no matter your stage, position, career, whatever. And I would say not only everybody's life, but really every facet of their life. So not just their professional life, but also their personal life as well.
Mhm.
What
Mhm.
are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I agree completely. We all have relationships. We all have important decisions that we make. We all have stress, etc. And our emotional intelligence is going to help us with those areas in our life. And so, while yes, it is extremely important for leaders, CEOs, etc., And in fact, studies have shown that what differentiates the most effective leaders from average leaders is the degree of emotional intelligence they have. That does not mean it is not important for the rest of us. It's absolutely important for everybody.
Good. All right, I want to get back to those 4 key components.
Yeah.
So you describe the 4 key components of emotional intelligence as self-awareness,
Mhm.
self-management,
Yep.
social awareness, and social management. Let's work through each of those. So tell
Sure.
me what is self-awareness?
Self awareness is essential. It's where it all starts. So it is the ability to know what you're feeling and why you are feeling it. So being tuned into what is the emotion I'm feeling right now and what is causing that feeling. So that is the essence of what self-awareness is, very simply put. Self-management is then what do you do with that information, that self awareness? How do I manage that emotion? And I'm using that word very intentionally manage. It's not about controlling, it's not about stuffing emotions. It's about managing my emotion so that my behavior will help in this situation, that my behavior won't make something worse, that it will contribute in a positive way to an interaction, if you will, or for my own well being. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And so in saying that, you probably, although I'm sure these things happen concurrently,
Mhm.
you probably need to be self-aware first
Yes.
before you're able to self-manage. Is that true?
Absolutely. That is absolutely true. And all of the researchers agree that self-awareness is the foundation of emotional intelligence. It's hard to build abilities and behaviors in the other areas of emotional intelligence if you don't have that self-awareness of what am I feeling and why am I feeling it. Then comes that pause, if you will, to help you enact behaviors that would help you manage that emotion in a productive way. They're very connected, but self awareness is where it all starts.
Okay, perfect. Now talk to me about social awareness and social management.
So, social awareness is about picking up on emotional cues from other people. It's about paying attention to how people are responding to you. It's about being curious about their emotional reaction. You know, you hear phrases like reading the room, for example. That is an element of what social awareness is about. And two of the main things that fall in this bucket, if you will, is your listening ability and your ability to empathize and be able to understand where somebody else might be coming from. You don't have to agree with it, but to be able to understand where they're coming from, again, so that you can use that social emotional information to help you navigate situations.
Great. And then how about the social management?
Yeah, that is getting more complex. So each of these are building on each other. And relationship management or social management gets into things like being influential, connecting with people and influencing them in a positive way. It involves things like dealing with conflict, being a good collaborator with other people. So it very much builds upon the other quadrants, if you will, of emotional intelligence and becomes a much more complex set of behaviors and skills.
Okay, so when you listed these 4 elements, you listed them in a specific order, and now I'm see you're doing that for a reason. So you really kinda have to start with that self-awareness as the foundational principle, and then the self-management, then the social awareness, and then the social management. That
They
true?
all build. I mean, I think that is true. I think if let's say an individual did not have much self-awareness and they really wanted to develop their ability to handle conflict better, which would fall in the relationship management piece. They could probably do it, but it'd be a lot harder
Mm.
if they didn't have that awareness of, what am I feeling and why am I feeling it?
Mhm. And I would bet too, as you're starting down this pathway in this journey, if you're trying to improve, you
Mhm.
should probably start and sort of go in order, at least on where you focus. But for folks that are very good at it, that
Mhm.
high EQ person with incredibly high emotional intelligence, they're
Mhm.
really doing all four simultaneously, right? Kind of integrating all four of those things as they interact with others.
Yes, I think that's accurate.
Okay, so that's the ultimate goal that we've got to get to. You mentioned that emotional intelligence can be measured. How is that measured? Is it like an IQ test that you can take?
Yeah, it is a test, and there are several of them out there that are valid, are reliable assessments. In my coaching practice, we use one. It's very rigorous, been studied for over 30 years. There's several very good assessments out there, and they're designed based upon the creators belief about what emotional intelligence is. Getting back to, is it a set of skills? Is it a set of traits that I'm born with, etc.? A really good one for our listeners that anybody can access is within the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Travis Bradberry. It's a book you can purchase anywhere, and with it comes a code to an online assessment that will give you an idea of where you fall in each of those four quadrants. It's built on that same model. And it's very effective. I really like that one. I recommend that one all the time for people who may not have access to some of these more expensive, rigorous tools that we might use in leadership development.
Good. Well, when I put my, I'm part scientist and researcher, and when I put my research hat on or my scientist hat on, and I'm asking about something, some sort of concept, a couple of the questions that I always ask is, can this thing be measured? Number one, and then number two, can it be improved? And emotional intelligence, I think, is something that people don't really think of as a hard science necessarily. But here you're telling me that it is something that number one can be measured, and number two can be improved. Is that
Yes,
correct? All right.
100%.
Good,
Yep.
good. Well, let's talk a little bit about why people should focus on this and what the benefits are. So we'll kind of move into our second question. Why is EI, emotional intelligence, such an important skill in our modern culture?
We're human beings. And again, we all have relationships and problems and complexities to deal with in life. And in today's culture, especially, with the explosion, and I think a concern of a lot of people, you've heard it, I'm sure, I know I have, that, oh, we're going to be, replaced by machines. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Machines, at least not now, they don't feel empathy. They don't build relationships. They can't collaborate. They aren't solving complex problems per se. So that we all need it to have healthy relationships for our own well-being. It's super important for our own well-being. And again, just to be able to cope with the demands of everyday life, no matter how much machines are part of our world, they're not human.
It's a phenomenal point you make, and I haven't thought about that yet. But it is one of the things that distinguishes us and defines us as a species. Our abilities to emote and understand the emotions of others and interact. And I do think, artificial intelligence is at an all time high. Is going to continue to grow and be helpful in a lot of great ways.
Right.
And I know a lot of people are worried about it and nervous about it, and how are they going to keep their jobs and do all these things? But one of the ways that we can and should distinguish ourselves is in our ability to understand our emotions and interact with other people and humans, and that's
Yep.
something that we have right now that's at least uniquely human.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So What are some of the key benefits that someone could expect from improving their emotional intelligence? And I think there's a lot of different categories and ways we could think about this, but I'll throw out a few different options. Can you tell us how it impacts relationships with
Mhm.
others?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, just think about it. If I, for example, if I'm not self-aware and I let my emotions take over instead of having the ability to manage it, I may routinely, if you will, with my relationships. I may say things that are inappropriate or that are based on an impulse that I later regret. So, our relationships, who is not in some type of a relationship with people? And so, to me, that is just fundamental of being human is that relationship piece. If we don't have high emotional intelligence, it's likely that our ability to communicate is less than effective, that we either misunderstand other people, creating all kinds of downstream effects if we misinterpret or misunderstand someone else without being curious to dig a little bit deeper about what they might have meant by what they said. So I think with communication, being understood and understanding other people is a big piece of that. So relationships is one big, huge bucket.
Good. I want to ask about some of the other things that I think people may not think about when they think about why I would want to improve my emotional intelligence. What about things like career achievement or advancement or financial opportunities? Is there any evidence to suggest that folks with a high emotional intelligence do better in those areas or can have better outcomes or faster career advancement?
Absolutely in career advancement. No question in my mind about that. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about, having a threshold IQ to be able to do the aspects of a job, technically speaking, but then to be able to manage relationships, unless you are just completely in some type of position where you don't interact with human beings, then, maybe it doesn't matter so much. So I think for sure with not just career advancement, because not everybody wants to climb the ladder, if you will. I go back to the young woman that I described earlier with an intellectual disability. Her success, she may never go beyond the current job that she is doing. She's happy as a clam, and customers love her. That is success to a huge degree. So, maybe success is just career success is about, keeping your job, that could be. Financially, I'm not aware of studies about individual connection or individual financial success and emotional intelligence. There have been studies done on businesses, however, whose leaders have higher emotional intelligence tend to have more financially productive organizations.
And then what about more on a personal level? So I think, and you sort of highlighted that higher job satisfaction is probably going to be there for folks that have higher levels of emotional intelligence. What about other things outside of the workplace? And it's sort of non-professional. So thinking about feelings of stress and joy and wellness, how is that impacted by emotional intelligence?
Yeah, being able to manage stress is critical, of course, to well being. And here's a really important point that I want people to understand is that anybody can fall victim to burnout. It is very wrong to think that somebody who is suffering from burnout doesn't have emotional intelligence. That is not true. So first I want to say that there's, as we know, there's so much more that goes into burnout than just one's ability to manage stress. So, having said that, the ability to know and understand what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, where is that stress coming from, and being able to manage that stress through a variety of means, whether that's exercise, whether that's eating better, getting enough sleep. All of those things are very, very important to well being, as is one's emotional intelligence and their ability to emotionally manage stress.
That's great, and I like that you brought up that connection of emotional intelligence and burnout, and I think it's a big one. And we talked in the Human Optimization Project about burnout in the past, and one of the things I think is oftentimes people think about burnout as being a dichotomous variable. You either are burned out or you are not, as a yes no thing. And in reality, I think it really lives more as a spectrum.
Mhm.
And on one end of the spectrum, maybe we have burnout, exhaustion, fatigue, collapse. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have thriving, success, joy, happiness, very, thrilled with where you are. And in reality, we all live somewhere in between those two extremes on that spectrum. And so even if you think I'm not burned out,
Mhm.
the next question you have to ask yourself is, am I experiencing maximal joy, productivity, well-being? Am I thriving? So it's not just about running from burnout, it's running towards thriving and joy and well-being. And I think emotional intelligence is one of the key factors in helping you head in that positive direction as well.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay, now let's get to the hard part. I want to talk a little bit about the steps we can take to actually improve our own emotional intelligence. And so, in doing that, I think that we first sort of have to assess ourselves a little bit.
Mhm.
So, what are some signs I can look out for that might show that my emotional intelligence is not optimized?
Well, I think there's a few things that one can contemplate. Do you find yourself being very reactive? And again, not having that pause between trigger and response, and then saying or doing things that you find yourself regretting. I mean, we all do that from time to time, but is that something that seems more frequent for you? Are your relationships strained? Do you find it really hard to build and maintain relationships? That could be a very serious sign of lack of emotional intelligence or low emotional intelligence. Another sign might be, do you find yourself, for example, in the workplace, maybe you come out of a meeting and you say to a colleague, wow, can you believe what happened in there? And they're like, what are you talking about? And in other words, you are misinterpreting situations on a more frequent basis. Again, we all do that from time to time, but does that seem to be a pattern for you? And it could just be, are you in touch with what you're feeling? Could you even name your emotion at any given moment? And I've worked with leaders who have said, "No, I can't do that. It's not something that I have been intentional about doing." So that's a real thing. I mean, to some people that might sound funny. What, you don't know what you're feeling? Well, if I were to ask you right now, what emotion are you feeling? You'd probably have to think about it a little bit. I'm willing to bet you could come up with an emotion though that you were feeling.
Well,
And
and I think we can, but oftentimes that answer
Mhm.
is likely going to be an oversimplification of
Agreed.
what we're actually feeling. And even if we can give an answer to that question, it's probably not a full representation or fully accurate of the actual emotions we are feeling.
100%. There's the core emotions, happy, mad, sad, but then there's such much more discernment. There's frustration. I mean, rage is very different than irritation. They both may fall in the category of mad, but very different in terms of the emotional response. So, absolutely, that was a great call out.
Good. Before we get into the sort of the step by step approach to improving emotional intelligence, are there other factors outside of emotional intelligence that we need to be thinking about optimizing that will put us in a better position for success? And sort of what I mean, like to give an example, is this something that is going to be, if I'm trying to improve my emotional intelligence, it's probably going to be incredibly hard for me if I am chronically sleep deprived, and not in a good physical state. So, what are some of those other factors? And not to say that we can fix everything all at once, but what are some of the other, just a quick hit on, some of the other factors we need to be thinking that if we can get those things in order, that will also help us with our emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I don't think it's any surprise. I think exercise is a very important part of that. I think things like mindfulness practices, just taking 5 minutes out of your day to just, kind of calm and center yourself. I think how you eat is, I'm a dietitian by background. So I very confident that there is a connection there. So really the same kinds of general things that we know are important for overall health also contribute to helping us maximize our and build our emotional intelligence.
That's a great call out, and I do think those, sleep, nutrition, exercise, stress management, all those things go together, and it can feel overwhelming. You think, "Oh, I got to fix all of this in my life," but in reality, if you can start making some positive progress in those areas, I think you will see compounding benefits in other areas as well. Okay, all
Agree.
right, so let's dive in. What's the step by step plan for improving emotional intelligence? I know there's not such a thing, but give me
Yeah.
your best shot.
Yeah, there isn't such a thing. However, what I will say, one of the biggest points I want to make is that it takes practice and intention. So it's not just going to happen by osmosis or maturity. I mean, maturity can certainly help. It truly does if there are specific behaviors that you want to change about yourself to have better relationships, to deal with conflict better, to manage stress, all of those things. It really does take practice and intention. So one of the exercises that I have used for many years in my coaching practice and what I teach in classes on emotional intelligence that I think is a great place for people to start if they are not in tune with what they're feeling and why they're feeling it. So that deals with the self-awareness and self-management piece is an exercise called the ABCs of emotion. And this comes from Dr. Albert Ellis, who's considered the founder of rational emotive behavioral therapy. He's a psychologist, cognitive behavior therapy. And the ABCs stand for activating event, beliefs, and consequences. And so, what that means in simple terms is that activating events is a trigger, something that generates a strong emotional response. Okay. Beliefs, this is the important part. Beliefs is the self talk, how we interpret that event. Now, we do this all day long. Things are happening, we are making interpretations about what is happening, and then there are consequences, meaning we feel an emotion and we behave in certain ways, and we have a physiological response. And it's from those consequences that we then take action that either moves us forward or can get in our way. And so learning how to distinguish when you are triggered, knowing what are your triggers, super important. And then paying attention to that self talk. How are you interpreting that situation, which happens in lightning speed? That's why it takes intention. What am I telling myself about what is happening right now? And being willing to put a big fat question mark on that self talk because the way you are interpreting something might be wrong. It might be right, and it could be wrong. So it's not to dismiss that belief or that self talk, it's to question it so that you can, be curious, ask questions, seek more information before you respond in a way that might be inappropriate for the situation. So that's like a fundamental exercise that I highly, highly recommend.
So I like that ABC exercise. You talk about thinking through the consequences and using it as information. I've also heard you talk a little bit about being an emotional scientist.
Yes.
Tell our audience exactly what you mean by that. What is an emotional scientist?
Yes, I love the term, which was coined by Dr. Mark Brackett, who is the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. He's got a great book called Permission to Feel, and it is there where I first read about this term, emotional scientist. And he encourages us to look at emotions as a data point, as a piece of information. Don't draw conclusions, don't be an emotional judge, be an emotional scientist and be curious, meaning get behind that, ask questions, whether it's of yourself, whether it's about somebody else. Be curious, not judgmental in responding to emotions in yourself or other people.
Great. All right. So practicing the ABCs, which
Yep.
I like,
Yep.
working on being an emotional scientist as
Yep.
opposed to an emotional judge, which hits home with me, and I love that. What
Yep.
are some other steps and things that people need to be doing to get going on this journey?
I think if a good practice, I think, is to name your emotion. You can do that. I believe there's apps out there that can help you. Just set an alarm on your cell phone every few hours to just stop. What am I feeling right now? And to name it, to be able to discern, not just oversimplify, but what am I feeling right now? That will really help you build up your self awareness of what you're feeling. And then why am I feeling that? What's going on in my head? What's that self talk? I think is a really fundamental and important exercise that can help people get in touch with themselves if they're not already.
That's great. And if I could layer on one extra part to that, I would say name your emotion. And if the name you give it is happy, sad, or mad, don't accept it. Dig a little bit deeper.
Yes.
Because it might be happy, sad, or mad, but you need to refine it a little bit more. So that step one is name it. Number two, I think refine that a little bit more to dig deeper.
Yes. Yes.
Good, good. After you've put a name on the emotion, we talked about being a scientist, and then you think about it objectively. You try to understand it. You use it as a data point, which I think is really helpful. Once you feel like you've sort of understood it and you've described it, that
Mhm.
that emotion,
Mhm.
then our next step is probably self management. So how do we get from now understanding what we're feeling to the next step of managing it?
Yeah. So I think then it comes down to, all right, let me question myself. I've named it. I know what I'm telling myself and what's driving that emotion. Now I want to get curious about, is the way that I am interpreting this situation accurate? I might be wrong. What else might explain what is happening right now? An alternative explanation for what I am experiencing. Not to dismiss, for example, let's say that somebody said something to me that I found very offensive and it triggered me, and I'm ready to lash out at them. If I understand, okay, I know what triggered me. I know what I'm telling myself, that this person meant to insult me. They were trying to make me mad, whatever that self talk is. Now, okay, how might I be wrong? How might somebody else have interpreted that in a different way? What are other similar situations where I've been wrong, and what did I learn from that? I mean, these are mental skills that, again, with practice and intention, you can do more quickly, so that you calm down your amygdala, which is that little part of your brain in the back of your head that is the stress, is activated by the stress response. And if we let our amygdala response take over, and Daniel Goleman refers to it as the amygdala hijack, now the prefrontal cortex, our ability to reason, to solve problems, to be logical, goes down. You could almost say our IQ goes down the higher our emotional response. So we want to re-engage our brain, light up that prefrontal cortex by asking ourselves questions. Question how we are interpreting a situation long enough to get our wits back about us so that we can make a more constructive choice in terms of what to say or do next.
Great. And I think that outlines very nicely what you should be doing between that, during that pause between the stimulus and the response. Viktor Frankl is a phenomenal quote about that we all know, and that really defines what that pause should consist of.
Absolutely.
Once we've done that, and then it comes time to respond, and I think that's when we're starting to interact with others, and that brings in the social component to it. What tips do you have for us for working on that piece?
Mhm. I think if you still are not, I'm using the example of an interaction with somebody else, and if you still aren't sure what to say or you don't trust what's going to come out of your mouth, again, number one, ask a question, an open-ended question. Number two, and this is maybe part of that mental questioning as well, is assume benign intent or positive intent on the part of the other person. I think that's super important. What can I say or do right now that will move the situation forward? And part of that might be drawing upon your empathy and putting yourself in that person's shoes and having the ability to understand what they're feeling and why they're feeling it. Maybe their behavior is inappropriate. Can you understand why they are reacting the way they are? And that empathy is a huge skill of emotional intelligence. I think can really help you take that next step.
Good. And we're going to have future sessions that are on empathy specifically. But one of the things I'd say quickly is if you think about this from a scientific perspective, if you have the information and you don't know what to do with it next, you don't know the action to take, another step, you need to ask more questions. You need to get more information. And so if and what I hear you telling me is that if you don't understand the other person, first assume benign intent. Don't assume that they're being malicious. But if you don't know, ask them, ask for clarity, and try to get to that point, to get the information you need to be able to fully understand that, but before you respond. I think that's incredibly helpful.
And I think another really important skill to practice in those situations, if you know nothing else to say, paraphrase what you just heard.
That's great.
It buys you a little bit of time to kind of get yourself together, and it offers that opportunity for them to respond and say, "Well, actually, that's not what I meant or what I said," or it confirms, "Yes, that is what I mean." So I think paraphrasing is a really underutilized skill that we all possess.
Well, that's great, and I feel like you've done a really good job of sort of laying out a very thoughtful, intentional, sort of linear approach that we can take to this, and it's incredibly well organized, but it's not easy. And
No.
so I don't want people to think, "Oh, that's simple. I'll just follow this step-by-step plan, and I'm gonna be an emotional genius."
Right.
So, what should the expectation be of somebody who's trying to improve? How long is it gonna take them to improve? How much are they gonna mess up along the way?
Oh, they're gonna mess up. There's no question. I think, we haven't talked about seeking feedback from other people. So I think first, what you need to do is identify what do I need to work on? What are those things? And you may have an idea of that yourself. Maybe you're impulsive. And seek feedback from people that you trust that will give you the hard truth, to help you shape what it is that you want to work on specifically. If you just go, "Oh, I want to improve my emotional intelligence," well, good luck. where do you even start with that? So I think being really specific and choosing, a couple of things maybe to work on very deliberately and with intention and seek feedback along the way. It's not going to happen overnight. Much of this is behavior. And so changing, long-standing behaviors can or patterns of thought can take a long time. So to be patient, and I think journaling is an awesome practice to help one do a number of things with emotional intelligence, get in tune with yourself, having to put thoughts in your head and translating those thoughts to intelligible sentences on paper. There's something that happens there that can deepen learnings and insights about yourself. It can help you see patterns of your own behavior over time. It can help you think about, okay, how did I respond today when so and so said this? What was my response? Am I happy with that response? What could I have done differently? I think that's a really powerful tool as
That
well.
That's wonderful, Marianne. And I say it is complicated, understanding our own emotions, learning how to manage those, dealing with others, all of those things are really challenging, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And
Right.
and I do think it's difficult to improve, but as with most things in life, things that are difficult, when something is difficult to improve, that means a lot of people struggle with it. And that also means that if you can make small wins and small gains, you will often see an outsized benefit to those small wins and gains. Things that are easy to improve usually have a smaller return on investment in terms of the benefit that you get back for improving that easy thing. But when you work at something that's challenging like this and it's hard, I think even small gains can have massive implications, positive implications for your life.
Absolutely. I agree completely.
All
Mhm.
right. Well, thank you so much for taking us through. We'll kind of wrap up here, and I've been taking notes along the way. And if I could summarize the key learning points or surprising facts for me, number one, I loved your definition of emotional intelligence, which I think is phenomenal. I would encourage everybody go back at the beginning and listen to that word for word a couple times. I also like the way you structured it with the four key components, with self awareness, number one, self management being the second one, social awareness, and then social management. I think thinking of those four components really helps me keep it organized. And I think also can give me sort of an organized approach on how I need to attack it and in what order I need to go in it and where I need to focus my time and effort and energy in trying to do that. I also like the what we talked about in terms of emotional intelligence affecting multiple aspects of our lives. So it's not just your emotions and your relationships. It really affects, your stress, your joy, your well-being, your success, in so many areas. So I think the benefits can be huge. I'm also pleased to hear that emotional intelligence can be measured and that it can be improved. So I don't think we have to think of this as some sort of nebulous concept, and that this is a real thing, and that it is scientific, and there are methods for improving. And improving is not easy, but it is definitely doable. And I think that should give people hope and quite a bit of motivation. I love the tips that you gave in terms of how to actually improve. I think the ABCs are incredibly helpful. And I also really love the concept of being an emotional scientist. So just thinking about our emotions as data points, removing sort of our fear or prejudice or judgment against those emotions. Just think of it as pure data and then use that as information to decide, okay, do I have enough information? Do I need to get more information? And that'll kind of help with the next step. So, and then lastly, you really talked a lot about the importance of seeking feedback. I think that's a part of it. And honestly, seeking that feedback will sort of help a little bit with the social awareness and social management pieces of it as well. So I think that feedback is going to be critical. So I think those are great tips. And we've spent the last little bit going through our three big questions. I'm going to give you a chance to answer each of those succinctly for the audience. So, the first one we'll have you answer: what exactly is emotional intelligence, and how do you define it?
Yep. It is your personal and your social competence, the ability to know and understand yourself, what you're feeling and why you're feeling it, and the ability to be able to perceive emotions in other people and use that emotional information to help you navigate situations.
Great. And what are the benefits and why should I make it a priority to improve my emotional intelligence?
The benefits are just so broad. One's own well-being, satisfying relationships, enjoyment in work and work relationships, career success. Those are probably the top ones that come to mind.
Great. And then just a quick summary, what are the key steps I can take to maximize my own emotional intelligence?
Self-awareness is where it all starts. So if you are not a very self-aware person, start learning to discern, how am I feeling, what am I feeling, and how am I feeling it. Work on your listening. I don't know that we talked a lot about listening, but listening, and do more listening than talking, is very, very important and effective. And practice your empathy. Practice putting yourself in someone else's shoes and expressing that you understand why they feel the way they do. Those are some core things I would say, in addition to the ABCs.
Great. So our audience knows we always like to end with a challenge or a call to action to kind of help you get started in this process. So I think it makes sense based on what you told us that we should really be starting in the area of self-awareness. You mentioned triggers. I think we all understand that. We kind of are a little bit familiar with that. So my challenge for the audience is going to be sit down, make a list of your top 5 triggers, things that you know just sort of set you off.
Mhm.
So I want you to make that list. I want you to write them down, which I think will be helpful. And then the next step is I actually want you to find a loved one, somebody that you know and care about and who knows you really well, and ask them to make a list of your top 5 triggers as well. So you come up with your own list, have them come up with a list for you, and then you can do the same for the other person and then share those notes. And I think that'll be a way for you to sort of start that process of self-awareness. It's also going to be a chance for you to seek some feedback and then work a little bit on the social management and talking through it with others. So that's our challenge for this episode.
Great.
So, optimizers, there you have it. Mary and Jenny did a tremendous job walking us through this pretty difficult concept. The title of our discussion today is Emotional Intelligence Explained: How to Recognize, Understand, and Use Your Emotions to Be a More Effective Human. This was a massive concept with a lot of really good information in there that I think is universally applicable for all of us. Marianne, thank you so much for taking the time and helping us get this organized in our minds.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to contribute.
All right. So thank you everyone for joining us. As always, remember to live intentionally, consistently, better. Keep striving to be the best human you can be and never stop optimizing.